Okay, last genetics video. I hope. Yeah, I'm going to be confident. Yes, it's the last one. Okay. So we're going to get to the sort of last topic, which is the most complicated thing, I think, or the trickiest maybe. I don't know. But before we do that, we need to pause, push the pause button for a second, and just sort of remind ourselves that in addition to various different characteristics, right, not being inherited in a super simple way, right? So some things are incompletely dominant, some things are co-dominant, right? Other things, multiple different characteristics are all caused by one gene, pleiotropy, or multiple different genes are responsible for one trait, right? One characteristic. Okay, that's what this was about. But an important thing to remember, right, to really like hold on to is this idea that your characteristics, right, everything about you is shaped by many different forces. Some things are completely genetic, right? So your blood type, that trait, is completely determined by your genetics. Your environment, what you're exposed to, those kinds of things have absolutely no effect on your blood type, right? Completely genetic. And some traits are like that, right? Other things are a combination of what we call nature genetics and nurture your environment. Okay, so a really good example of this, and look at this, like all this rainbow of beautiful babies, right? What they're trying to get you to see with this picture is that there are other characteristics that are impacted by both your genes and your environment and how they kind of work together. So skin color is the example that they're giving you here, right? So what determines our skin color? Well, there's a couple of different things, but primarily both the shade and the amount of a protein called melanin that is produced in our hair and our skin, right? So people who tend to have lighter skin tones often have lighter melanin, and also they break it down faster, right? So it's produced in their skin cells and then it gets broken down quickly. People with darker skin tones tend to have both darker shades of melanin, and it tends to hang out in the cells longer. It doesn't get broken down as fast, okay? So all of us have like genetic determination that controls sort of, you know, what's the minimum or maximum, right, on your skin tone, right? So no matter how much I might try to tan myself, there are limits to how much melanin I can make, okay? Or how little I can make, right? But there's a range. And not only is it controlled by my genetics, but my body responds to my environment, right, by allowing melanin to linger longer or disappear faster based on sun exposure, right? So that is the fundamental source of a tan, right? So if you are someone who tans, some of us do not tan, some of us just burn. If you are somebody that tans, essentially what's happening is your skin is exposed to more sun, more ultraviolet radiation. And so what it does is your skin is recognizing that that radiation is dangerous. And so it allows the melanin to kind of stick around longer in your skin cells, right? And so this buildup of more than usual for you melanin makes your skin appear a little bit darker, right? And so as much as people don't notice it because, you know, they can't tell, every summer I spend a lot more time in the pool. And even though I am a sunblock junkie, because I don't want to get skin cancer, I'm pretty sure I already have some from, you know, stupid things I did when I was a kid and a teenager, not using enough sunblock. but I don't want more. Thank you very much. So I use a lot of sunblock now, but even still, right? In the summer, my skin color is, sorry, there's a fly in here, is noticeably darker than in the winter, right? You can look at pictures of me and you can tell, right, when that photo was taken. Was it taken like towards the end of winter? It's been a long, cold winter and I haven't spent much time outside, right? Or is it towards the end of summer in the fall when it's like, I've been outside all the time, I'm tan, right? So that particular trait, skin color, actually has influences from both your genes and also your environment. There are lots of things that are like this, right? So risk of developing certain kinds of cancer. Okay, so an excellent example of that is colon cancer, right? So your risk of colon cancer to a certain extent runs in families, right? If you have family members that have had colon cancer, you're at higher risk than people who don't have those genes in their family. Okay, does that mean that you're for sure going to get colon cancer? Not necessarily. You may not. But there's another component to that, and that is your diet, right? So what kinds of foods do you eat? Do you get enough fiber, right? Do you eat enough fruits and veggies? Do you eat a ton of, animal fat, right? What is your diet like? And that also affects your risk. Okay, so many cancers are like that. It's not just your genes, but also your environment that play a role. Okay. And then there's many other things, physical traits that have absolutely no genetic basis. So I love this because they show this young person who I'm assuming, I didn't even read the caption in your book. I'm assuming this person is from an Amazonian group with, look at all those fantastic piercings and like body paint and all of that, right? So there are lots of aspects of our physical appearance that have absolutely nothing to do with our genes, right? So, we can modify our appearance in all kinds of ways. But even if you're not thinking of like extreme, modification, just think about, when you go to the gym more, you might look a little more toned, more muscly. Okay. That's mostly just because of the activity that you're doing. Okay. Anyway. All right. So keep that in mind. Another thing that is kind of an extension of this is the concept of epigenetics. Epigenetics is one of these areas. It's like it's the new hotness in genetics. We are discovering now that there are, as it turns out, we're learning more and more all the time. There are a lot of characteristics where your DNA can actually be changed by your life experiences. And those things can be passed forward. So one of the things that we kind of kept saying when we were talking about evolution, we kept repeating over and over again is, what you experience in your life doesn't change your DNA, right? So the genes that your kids inherit from you are, your DNA, and that's not affected by your life. But it turns out that some are, right? And so there's actual like modifications or changes that happen to your DNA that can be inherited. So certain types of trauma, for example, right? If somebody experiences a very traumatic, very stressful, very hard life, certain characteristics can be passed on to their offspring, where their offspring are at higher risk of developing certain problems as a response to that inherited trauma, right? It's really fascinating area. Okay. We're not going to get into the details because it's kind of above and beyond this. We might talk about it a little bit in the future when we talk about DNA, but we're not going to talk about it anymore right now. Okay. One other fun example that I want you to think about for this whole like nature versus nurture, genes versus environment thing is that there are some genes specifically that sort of engage with, there are some, what do I want to say? There are some characteristics that are a very clear combination of both genes and environment. Okay. So if you look at these two cute little critters, one of them's obviously a bunny and a cat, and both of them have a very similar color pattern. And this is a type of pattern that you see a lot in various different mammals. Okay. So you'll notice that there's a darker coloration on like the front of the muzzle, okay, the mask. The ears are darker, the arms and legs are darker, the tail is darker, okay? And so this is found not just in Siamese cats, but also in Himalayans and, a lot of other cats. Your cat might have this particular trait. I had a cat that had this particular gene. My current two do not, so I can't use them as an example. What this is a very cool gene that produces light fur at warmer temperatures, but at cooler temperatures, it produces darker fur, right? And so the idea is that the extremities of these critters, the reason they're darker in color is because they're not as warm, right? The trunk of their body is toastier. Okay. And so, yeah, so our Siamese cat is, really light here and, still quite light all the way here, right? But the face and the ears, yeah, same thing on the bunny. Legs are dark because they're cooler, right? Okay, this is kind of a fun thing. You can actually like play with this and see the effect. So it's not just a pattern like based on location. It's not just a, oh, no, it doesn't have anything to do with temperature. It's just, their nose and their paws or, whatever. You can actually test this out, right? So you can take an animal that has this particular gene, right? This allele, and this coloration pattern, and you can actually, it takes time because you got to let their fur grow in a different color, right? But you can actually expose them to different temperatures, right, to change their fur coloration. Yeah. So I would imagine it would be easy to do if you had a Siamese cat in the winter that spent a lot of time in a, cold house or spent a lot of time outside, they would automatically be darker. And in the summer, their body would be lighter. Right. But, people have made shapes of pigment on animals, right, by adding an ice pack. This was my first cat that was my own cat, not like a family cat, but like Sarah's cat. His name was Walter. May he rest in peace. He was a terrible cat. He was so mean for no reason. He was violent. And anyway, interesting thing about Walter, he was not a purebred anything. He was just a mutt cat, right? Like got him at the shelter kind of cat. He was so pretty though. But the cool thing about him is he had that gene for the color difference, but he also had other genes for stripes, right? So he had some tabby cat genes, which is why he's got the stripes on his face and stripes on his legs, right? You can't really see in this picture. He's got like sort of pale striping on his body and pale striping on his tail, but he also had a dark tail, dark ears. The stripes on his face were darker than the stripes on his body, right? Because he had the influence of that gene as well. And his color would change depending on the season, right? So when it was cold, his face would get darker than, if it was a long, cold winter. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So we'll talk more about this sort of as we go. Okay. Last two sort of topics for this. One is linked genes. So we spent all this time in a previous video talking about independent assortment, this idea that different genes are inherited individually. They are not connected together. So the example we talked about is coat coloration in the Labrador retrievers and deafness, right? And how they're independently assorted when dogs are mated and you make puppies, okay? But there are actually some genes that don't do that. And those have a name. We call those linked genes, okay? This is going to make a lot more sense when we get to talking about cell division, which is next week, okay? The idea here is that some genes are so close to one another on the chromosome that they often get inherited together. So they are linked, okay? So I actually don't even really want to talk about this diagram yet because you don't know what crossing over is yet, okay? So we'll come back to this and we'll talk about this when we talk about meiosis. But the idea is sometimes you have genes that are linked, okay? More about that later. The last thing, which is kind of unfortunately named, is something called sex linkage. Now, you're going to think, oh, this has something to do with this kind of linkage. It's actually really kind of a different thing. Okay, so let's look at this and talk about it for a minute. So here we have two people. In the middle, we have an image of something that we call a karyotype. Okay, so we'll talk more about how karyotypes are made later. Okay, it's called a karyotype. Right? But essentially what a karyotype is it's a photograph of chromosomes, right? Of these strands of DNA, okay? Humans have, assuming that everything is typical, right? Humans have a total of 23 pairs of chromosomes, okay? Some of those chromosomes we call autosomes. That's the first 22 pairs, okay? So here's one pair, here's the second pair, here's the third pair, fourth pair, fifth pair, sixth pair, all the way up to 22, okay? So a typical person has 22 of these homologous pairs of chromosomes. We call them autosomes, but whatever, okay? Your last pair of chromosomes are referred to as your sex chromosomes because these are the chromosomes that are responsible for sex determination, okay? Now, this is sort of a complicated issue, and it's complicated because people don't necessarily appreciate all of the different things that can go kind of squirrely, okay? So most of the time, if somebody has two large chromosomes for their sex chromosomes, we call those X. So if you have two X chromosomes, your sex is female. If you have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, look at how itty bitty the little tiny Y is. He's so small. He's so small. Okay. If you have an X and a Y, then your sex is male. Now, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong with this actually, because what actually determines maleness is a specific gene that is on that Y chromosome. And if that gene is expressed correctly, and if the effects of that gene have the effect on the body that they're supposed to, right, then that's what produces maleness. Okay. Like I said, there's all kinds of things that can go, kind of squirrely with this. All right. So it's not really that simple of, oh, which chromosomes do you have? It's not quite that simple as it turns out. Okay. All right. So without getting into that too much, by the way, I'm going to reuse this video in future semesters, but if you are taking this class in the fall of 2020 and you're watching this video, on November 13th, I'm going to be in a panel where we're discussing gender fluidity, partly associated with the college book this year, right? And so we're going to talk about what it means to be gender fluid and what are, like the experiences of people that are gender fluid. My role in the workshop, I volunteered. I was like, dude, I need to talk about sex determination because so many people don't understand that. So many people think that biology is like simple and straightforward and mistakes don't happen. They're actually super common. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the details that I'm not getting into here, or if you want to understand in a little bit more detail the difference between sex and gender, come to the workshop on Friday, November 13th. I think we're starting at noon or 11. I don't remember. I'll attach a flyer to the thing if you want to go. So it's me and two other professors, Sheila Malone, who's in theater arts, she's amazing, and Hannah Lucas, she's a psychology professor. And so the three of us they're going to be talking about the important stuff, the gender stuff. I'm just going to be talking about like, here's where people are wrong part. Okay, so, but I like yelling at people, so it'd be great. Anyway, okay, so if you're interested, sorry for the tangent if you're taking this class in the spring or the summer and you're like, oh, I don't get to go to that. It might be recorded. Maybe I'll attach a recording. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. So that's how many chromosomes you have. You have a total of 46 chromosomes, or at least that's typical to have 46 chromosomes. Okay. 44 that are autosomes, and then your pair of sex chromosomes. Okay. As we talked about earlier, when you undergo meiosis, that's the type of cell division that produces your gametes. We split that number in half. So instead of having 46, you have 23 in a gamete. Okay. 22 autosomes plus an X if you're female, because there's two X's. So you can only get an X. Okay. If you're an egg. Okay. If you are a sperm, you get the 22 autosomes and either the X or the Y. This is, of course, is assuming that things go normally. Notice the air quotes. Okay. That things go the way that they typically do. All right. In the next section, we're going to talk about all the different ways that this can get screwed up. Okay. All the different ways that this can, go in a atypical kind of a way, right? A less common sort of way, right? So that's what your gametes have. 22 autosomes, right? One of each of those pairs, and then one of your sex chromosomes, okay? If you are female, since your sex chromosomes are both X chromosomes, you can guarantee that your eggs all have an X, right? Whereas males, it's 50-50, right? Half of the sperm have an X, half of the sperm have a Y. This brings us back to that conversation earlier about how I was saying that there are, all kinds of historical stories of, kings divorcing or murdering their wives because their wife failed to produce a male heir. And it's like, dude, your sperm is the one that has the Y chromosome in it. So that's on you, buddy. That's on you, chief. Okay. Anyway. All right. Why does this even matter? Well, this is interesting. Okay. As it turns out, remember how I said the Y chromosome is just this little itty bitty thing? It has very few genes on it, right? So it has a couple, obviously the ones that are responsible for maleness. Okay, so that's important. But it doesn't have that many other genes on that chromosome because it's so itty bitty. Okay, whereas the X chromosome has a lot of genes, most of which have absolutely nothing to do with sex determination. Absolutely nothing to do with, your private parts. Okay. Nothing to do with sex related anatomy at all. Okay. On the X chromosome, you have genes for that affect your vision or your ability of your blood to clot, right? So all kinds of things that have absolutely nothing to do with sex. But what's interesting is that disorders that are associated with genes that are on the X chromosome are expressed differently in males and females because females have two X chromosomes, but males only have one. Okay, so we're going to talk about two examples. Okay, so here's one. This is the last royal family in Russia. Okay, I don't know why this is the example that they always talk about, but it is. Okay, now our like symbols are kind of weird. Okay, the particular trait that we're looking at here is we are looking at a disorder called hemophilia. Hemophilia is a disorder where your blood does not clot properly. Okay. Hemophilia nowadays is quite survivable. It requires treatment, right, for your whole life, basically. But it's quite survivable if you have access to good care. Okay. But back in the day, it was bad, right? Because if you got even a small wound, you could theoretically bleed to death because you wouldn't clot. People who have untreated hemophilia tend to get just massive bruises, right? Because essentially what a bruise is bleeding under the skin, right? And so if your blood never clots, you just keep bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And so you get these just like massive hematomas and it's awful, okay? So that's hemophilia, right? So like I said, nowadays, treatable, manageable, okay? But back in the bad old days, not so much. Okay, now you'll notice here that they're including X's and Y's in this. And the reason is that hemophilia, the gene for hemophilia, is carried on the X chromosome. It is not carried on one of the autosomes. It's carried on the X chromosome. Okay, so when we set up our Punnett square, we need to associate it with the X because we need to remind ourselves that boys only have one X, right? Women have two. Ladies, females have two X chromosomes. Males only have one, and then they have the Y. Okay, so in our little key, right? Now, hemophilia is a recessive trait, so they're using XH, big H for normal, X with a little h superscript for hemophilia, and then the Y is just there to remind us the sex of the individual, okay? Because Y doesn't have a gene for this characteristic, because remember, it's super small. So it can't have all the genes that the X chromosome has. It doesn't have any of the genes that the X chromosome has because it's tiny. Okay. All right, so here we have a family, right? So we've got Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, okay? So a pedigree, a pedigree, right? There we go. We're looking at circles and squares, right? So circles are the ladies and squares are the gentlemen, right? And so they are, both parents are healthy. They did not have hemophilia. Okay. But it turns out that when they had children, had a bunch of daughters, right? But you know how it is with royal families. They need a son to carry on the family line, right? So a bunch of daughters, which are, you know, useless to them. And then they had their son, Alexei. Well, it turns out that Alexei actually had hemophilia. Okay. And he inherited it from his mother. And we know that he inherited it from his mother because where do boys get their X chromosome from? Well, because by virtue of the fact that he is male, he has a Y chromosome. You can't get a Y chromosome from your mama because she doesn't have those. So all you can get from your mom is an X chromosome, right? But daddy is the source of the Y. Okay, so Alexei got his Y from dad, and then he got the X from mom. Okay, now unfortunately for Alexei, he was not lucky, right? Now we know that the Tsarina was heterozygous. How do I know that she was heterozygous? How do I know that? So we also know that dad, we know both of their genotypes. Right? Why do we know their genotypes? Well, notice neither of their shapes are filled in with that yellow color. Okay, both healthy. So if Tsar Nicholas was healthy, then he must have had the normal gene on his X chromosome. And Tsarina was also healthy. So she must have had the normal gene as well. But her other one, I'm just going to put a little blank there. Her other one must have been a hemophilia allele, okay? Because we can tell that because their son, Alexei, turned out, oh my gosh, this fly is making me crazy, right? Turned out to have hemophilia, okay? All right? The thing about sex-linked genes is they tend to be expressed more often in males. And the reason is that males only have one X chromosome, right? They're not expressed in females very often because females have two X chromosomes. So we have backup, right? So the sisters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, right? Their shape is not filled in. And you wouldn't expect it to be because guess what? If by virtue of the fact that they're female, all of them got a big H from dad. Right? So none of them would have had hemophilia What we don't know from this pedigree, however, is we don't know if any of them were carriers, because they could have gotten this X from their mama, in which case they would be a carrier of hemophilia, though they would not express that phenotype themselves. Okay, so if you look at our little Punnett square, right, here's our Punnett square of these two parents. Yeah, so from Tsar Nicholas, we've got the normal X and the Y, which has nothing on it. From the Tsarina, we've got two X chromosomes. One of them has the normal, one of them has hemophilia, right? And we got to track the X's and Y's so that we can figure out sex. Okay, so if this couple, if the royal family, if they had 5 kids, if they had 20 children or 100 children or 1,000 children, I'm making up crazy numbers, right? Would it be possible for that couple to ever have a child that is both female and hemophiliac? Would that be possible? Looking at that Punnett square. And the answer is no. No, right? Because all of their daughters are going to get the normal on the X chromosome from their dad. So half of them are going to get the normal from mom. Half of them are going to get the hemophilia from mom. But at worst, they'll be a carrier. Okay. Now, what if they had more sons? Would it have been possible for this couple to have a son that did not have hemophilia? Absolutely. Right? Depending on which X they got from mom. Right? So poor Alexei, unfortunately, got that one. Right? So he was not lucky in the genetic lottery, as it turns out. Okay. But if they had other sons, right? Some, on average, right, 50% of the time, their son would be healthy. 50% of the time, a son would have hemophilia. Okay. That's what sex linkage is. Now, here's the thing that you're gonna do. Okay. Now that we have looked at this, here, I'm gonna finish my drawing. I'm putting in question marks because we don't know what their second. Oh, that's not a question mark. That's a 2. I'm putting in question marks because we don't know what they have. We can't tell based on looking at them. Okay. They could be carriers. They could be homozygous, normal. Okay. Here's the thing that you're going to want to do. Now, because I've shown you this example of a pedigree where we care about sex linkage, now you're going to want to do all of your pedigrees with X's and Y's. But remember, the only time we care about X's and Y's is if the particular trait, the particular gene that we're looking at, is carried on the X chromosome. And the vast majority of things we talk about are not. Okay, so for most pedigrees, I'm going to scroll back. Scroll. Woo! Most pedigrees, there's no X's and Y's in here because it doesn't matter. Because these traits that we're talking about in these examples are inherited on autosomes, on the non-sex chromosomes. So the whole XY thing don't matter. The only time X and Y matter is specifically if you have sex linkage, right? If a particular trait in question is carried on the X chromosome. One of you right now, maybe more than one, is thinking, what about diseases that are carried on the Y chromosome? There aren't very many of those because remember, it's itty bitty. Okay. And those are not confusing at all because guess what? If something is carried on the Y chromosome, then only males are going to have it. Females would not at all. Okay. You don't have to do a Punnett square for that. Right? Okay. That's sex linkage or X linkage. Okay. One more example of this. There are various different types of color blindness. One of them is called red-green color blindness. If you are looking at these images and you can clearly see certain numbers in these images, congratulations, you are probably not colorblind. Okay, so if you see a 7 in this picture, you're not colorblind. If you see a 29 in this picture, you're not colorblind. If you see an 8 in this picture, you are not colorblind. If you see other numbers, I don't even remember what they are because I'm not colorblind. I can't see them. So I want to say this one is it's like 10 or something. I don't remember. Yeah. Anyway, if you see other numbers than what I listed, you may have red-green color blindness. Okay. What happens in red-green color blindness is the photoreceptors that are in your eyes that detect color, for whatever reason, the ones that detect red and green send your brain doesn't interpret that as two separate colors. It doesn't, right? It picks up stimulation, but it doesn't, your brain doesn't sort that as two separate colors. So they both look kind of the same, right? Which I can't even imagine because I don't have that problem. Okay. This trait, whether or not you have normal vision or red-green color blindness, is carried on the X chromosome. So, what are some predictions that we could make about red-green color blindness? Do you think red-green color blindness is more common in males or females? It's found on the X chromosome. So is it more common in males or females? Well, one thing you need to know is that it is a recessive condition, right? So is it going to be more common in males or females? Let's explore this. Okay, we're going to talk about my step family because they have red-green color blindness in their family, first of all. And second of all, I know them well enough to know their, basically most of their pedigree. Okay, so let's make a pedigree, okay, of this family, okay, of my step family, and we'll fill in everything I know, right? And I'm just going to kind of walk through here slowly but surely, okay? And so for each symbol, I'm going to use the conventions that we've been using in the chapter, right? So circles are female, squares are male. Fill in if somebody is affected with a particular, disorder. So in this case, filled in would be colorblind, okay? So circles are female, squares are male, filled symbols, red, green, colorblind. Okay, whether it's a circle or a square. Okay, one other thing I want to say is if you have done pedigrees in an anthropology class, they use slightly different symbols than we do. Sorry. I don't know why, but they do. So you're just going to have to forget that and go with mine. Okay, I'm actually going to erase this to leave myself more room. All right, let's do this. Okay, so Susan is my stepmom. Susan has a brother. His name is Andy. Okay. Now, if I'm connecting Susan and her brother, how am I going to connect them? And am I going to connect them with a horizontal line like this? No, that would be icky. That would mean they had babies together. So no. So how am I going to connect Susan and her brother? I'm going to connect Susan and her brother with a bracket like that. And it's going to go up to their parents. Okay. Who have both passed on now. But I remember their names, so I'm going to write them down. Okay. So Susan and Andy, their parents' names are super cute. They're so South Carolina. Okay. Homer and Billy. Okay. So their dad's name is Homer. Actually, it's Alexander, but they called him Homer. Okay. So dad is Homer. Mom is Billy. Okay. Susan married a guy named Charlie. This is before she married my dad. She and my dad did not have any children together. So I don't have half siblings that I'm aware of. I just have the step siblings. Okay. And Charlie and Susan had 2 kids. What am I going to draw here? One of them, a daughter named Ashley. One of them, a son named Alex. Okay? All right. Andy's married. He doesn't have any kids. So we get no information from Andy. Thank you very much, Andy. Okay. I can't even remember what his wife's name is. I haven't seen them in like decades. Anyway, I'm not even gonna try. Okay. Now Alex is 5 years younger than me. No, he's not. He's 2 years younger than me. Ashley is 5 years younger than me. Alex is married to Samantha. I'm gonna write Sam because Samantha is too long. Okay. And Alex and Samantha have a truckload of kids. They have 4 children, but only 2 of the children are genetically related to them. The other 2 are adopted. Okay. So since this is a genetic family tree, I'm not saying that the girls aren't important. They're very important emotionally, but they're not on this pedigree because they're not biologically related. Okay. So Alex and Sam have 2 biological children, both boys, right? Hunter, Nathan. And then I'm just going to put girls plus the girls. No, I'm not. They're not a part of this. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Okay. Hunter and Nathan are in elementary school, so they're not married with kids. Oh, Nathan. I made Nathan a girl. Sorry there, Nathan. Fiction. I mean, there's worse things you could be, Nathan, besides being a girl, but turns out you're not. Okay, so let's do this. All right. Color blindness. How did I first find out about the color blindness? Well, Alex is colorblind. It's actually kind of funny because Alex, once upon a time, was a police officer. He is not any longer. Now he is a dog trainer. But he was a police officer. And I was like, Alex, how did you even like get hired as a police officer if you're colorblind? Like colorblindness is supposed to be like a no-go for, like law enforcement, and I don't know. Anyway. Okay. So he has red-green color blindness. He cannot tell the difference between red and green. Right? It was funny when they had their first son, when they had Hunter. He was like, how am I supposed to teach him his colors if I can't, if I can't tell the difference between them? And Susan was like, you just read the label on the crayons, you dummy. Anyway, they cracked me up. Okay. All right. So Alex has red-green color blindness. He cannot distinguish between those 2. All right. Where did he get it from? So let's write his, it's kind of crunched here because I didn't leave that much space. So because Alex is male, I'm just putting in some X's and Y's. Because Charlie, sometimes Charlies are girls. This particular Charlie is not. Okay, Billy. So I'm just writing the X's and the Y's. We will fill them in with the color blindness. So maybe let's do B because it's easy to see. So big B is normal. I hate that word, normal. And little b is red, green, colorblind. Okay. Alex has red, green color blindness. So what kind of B does he have? Does he have a big B or a little b? He got a little b. Okay. All right. What does that tell us about previous generations? Well, if Alex's X has a little b, that tells us that Susan, or Susu, as the grandkids call her, Susu has a little b. Because Alex got the Y from Charlie. Charlie was not colorblind, by the way. That's what I'm told anyway. I never met him, but I'm told he had normal vision. Okay, but Susu was a carrier. Okay, because, and I know this because her son, Alex, is colorblind. Susan is not. In fact, she is quite the interior decorator. Her house is like beautiful. Okay, so Susan, we might call her a carrier. She has the allele for colorblindness, but she does not express that trait because she's female. She's got a good X chromosome that has the gene for normal color vision, right? So even though she carries the trait, she does not exhibit the trait. She does not express the gene. Okay, cool. All right, Ashley. Let's talk about Ashley for a sec. So is Ashley colorblind? Yes or no? Well, first of all, because Ashley is female, she had to get this X from Charlie, from her dad. Because if she had a Y, she wouldn't be a she. Okay? She would be Ash instead of Ashley. Okay? So because she's female, we know that she got the X with the normal color vision from her dad. Which one did she get from her mom? We don't know at this point. Question mark. Ashley could be a carrier. She might not be a carrier. We don't know. How might we find out? I mean, okay, we could do genetic testing or whatever. But the one way we could find out is if she had kids. Well, Ashley has not had any kids. I don't know if she's going to. Good for her, dude. Oh my God, they're so stressful. Okay, so Ashley doesn't have any kids. So we don't know what her other X chromosome has in store. Okay, because she could have gotten either one from her mom, right? Okay. All right, Samantha also happens to not be colorblind. She sees colors just fine. Okay. Now, the question you ask yourself is, what is Samantha's other X chromosome? So when Alex and Samantha, so I've been using this as an example forever. I only recently told Susan that I used them as an example in my biology class, and she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, I'm not making fun of you guys. It's like, it's good. She was like, oh my God. Oh my God, y'all. They live in Georgia, so they have that super charming Southern accent. So Sam, when Sam and Alex got together, when Samantha and Alex got together and they got married, I was like, Sam, I have to ask you a question. And she was like, okay. And I was like, does red-green color blindness run in your family? And she was like, no. I was like, I need to know because it matters for my class, for my example. So she is not aware of any red-green color blindness in her family. So most likely her other X chromosome has a big B as well. Most likely. We don't know for sure though, because she could be a carrier. We know that she can see color. Okay. Now, how are we going to find out about Sam? How are we going to find out about that second letter? Okay. Hunter and Nathan. Okay. Hunter and Nathan. All right. Well, they're both boys, so they got their Y chromosome from Alex, both of them. So they got X's from mom. What kind did they get? They both have normal color vision. So either that means they both got lucky and they got this X from Sam, or Sam's got another big B. We don't know. Okay. But there it is. Okay. So another pattern that you may notice with sex linkage is typically males are the ones that are affected, but the parent that they got the bad gene from is their mom, right? So Alex, because he got his Y from his dad, he got the little b from his mom, from Susan. Okay, let's make this even crazier. Let's talk about Homer and Billy. Okay, Homer, normal color vision, right? And that's how I know. Andy, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Right? The fact that Homer has normal color vision, right, tells us Susan got at least one big B, which we knew because she's not colorblind. So she got the X from her big B from Homer, right? Andy got his Y from Homer. I don't remember if Andy is colorblind or not, so I'm going to write a question mark. I think he's also colorblind, I think. So let's just pretend he is, because that makes for a more interesting situation. Oh, wait, no, now, okay. Never mind. I remember now he is, because the rest of my story won't make sense unless he is. Okay, well, I don't know about Andy's wife. Doesn't matter because they don't have kids. Okay, so Andy is colorblind. So Andy is colorblind. Susan is a carrier. Okay, so if Andy is colorblind, what does that tell you about his mama, Billy? She has to have at least one little B, because that's where Andy got it from, because he got his Y from Homer, so he had to get the little B from Billy. Guess who else got a little B from Billy? Susan, right? Because she got the big B from her dad, from Homer. She got the little B from her mom. Here's the part that's weird. It turns out Billy was actually homozygous. And this is why this is such a fun example, right? Because Billy is very unique in the fact that she was R.I.P. Billy and Homer. Billy was a colorblind, a woman with red-green color blindness, which is not typical. Not typical. Okay? And so if Homer and Billy had more children, all of their sons, if they had 1 million sons, all of them would be colorblind, because the only kind of X they could get from their mom is one with a little B. All of their daughters would all be carriers, because they would all get the big B from dad and then one of the little B's from mom, right? So Susan was a guaranteed carrier. The fact that Susan had a colorblind mother means that she's a guaranteed carrier. Okay. She probably even knew that before she had kids. It was probably not a surprise that Alex has red-green color blindness, because he essentially had a 50-50 shot, right? Okay. One interesting thing to think about, we're just going to go one more step further, is I don't know Billy's parents. Like, I don't know anything about them, right? But based on Billy's genotype, what could you tell me about Billy's parents? I'm just going to leave that as an unsolved mystery. Okay? Based on what you know about this trait, based on what you know about inheritance. Ask me in a Zoom. What possible genotypes could Billy's parents have? Okay? All right. My door just opened. Somebody is lurking. Oh, it's a big person, not a small person. Okay. We're done with this. Stop lurking. Okay, we're done. We're done here.